So welcome, welcome, welcome. I am just delighted to be sharing with you one of my favorite realms in the universe to explore. And I really do think of it as a realm, and it's the realm of sacred storytelling. And what we're going to be doing is going on an adventure into really exploring what is the landscape of sacred storytelling? What does it mean to be a conscious creator in this time? And I'm going to give you a little hint into where we're going to be playing is that, and then what makes story sacred? And one of the distinguishing aspects that we're going to be exploring is this vehicle, this vessel, this instrument that is you, your voice, your heart, your body, and the unique opportunity that we have as humans to actually get to be this highway that where spirit and earth can come into being through our words, speaking things into being. So it's a really beautiful, profound journey that we're going to get to step onto today in terms of what is it to be a sacred storyteller. And I'm going to start us off with a quote. But actually, before that, I do want to invite you just to take a moment to close your eyes and to come rest in the center of your soul. And maybe that looks like placing a hand on your heart. Maybe that means breathing into your belly and just taking a moment and really consider, why are you here now? And I don't mean like the big existential question, but you've all dedicated an hour of your life to this conversation and this wondering about storytelling, and storytelling as something that can bring healing to this planet. So I'm asking you to consider, why are you here? Is it because there's a story inside of you that is banging around your ribs saying, it's time for me to get out. I need to be shared? Or is the muse bothering you and harassing you, saying, please let me speak through you. Lend your voice to me. Let me bring the inspiration of these times. Let them be spoken through your voice, through the resonance of your heart. Or perhaps you're one of those rare ones among us who feel inclined and your purpose fulfilled by making sure that we don't forget our old stories, and that you're one of those who are carrying those old stories forward. I really invite you to consider what is calling you to the threshold of not just being a storyteller that's going to use story to sell somebody's product or their business, but as someone who wants to be in right relationship with story as a sacred art. I'm going to read you a quote. We think we tell stories, but stories often tell us. They tell us to love or to hate, to see or be seen, and often, too often, stories will saddle us and they will ride us and they will whip us onward. And they'll tell us what to do, and we'll do it without questioning. I'm going to read that one more time. And I have one issue with this quote, which is the word we, because I have no idea what your relationship is, but I'm going to respect this author and repeat it again. We think we tell stories, but stories often tell us. They tell us to love or to hate, to see or be seen. And often, too often, stories will saddle us and they will ride us and they will whip us onward and they will tell us what to do. And we do it without questioning. The task of learning to be free requires learning to hear them, to question them, to pause and hear silence, to name them, and then become a storyteller. That's Rebecca Solnit. And I love beginning with that quote because it really gets to the very essence of what it is to be a conscious creator. And that we don't want to just be taking up any story and telling it, but there's a journey that we come to stand at the threshold of becoming a sacred storyteller. And that's going to be part of the journey that I'll be taking you on today. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about who I am and what we're doing here. And my name's Leah Lamb, and I am a devotee to storytelling as a sacred and healing art. and as a doorway to the mysteries of understanding ourselves on this earth and understanding our place in this universe. It's a very cosmic expression, as I understand what it is to be in relationship to story. And I really believe that when you really understand how to be in relationship to story, that story will teach us everything we need to know about how to be great humans, not just any old human, but truly like in that exalted state of fullest expression of self. And part of my journey began on a farm in Vermont. I got to live out, and we had what they call back 40. We had a lot of acreage behind our farmhouse. My dad was a veterinarian, and I lived in a time when they would tell kids, they would just open the door and they'd be like, "Come back for dinner, go wander." And that was the game that they gave us, and so I got to really be alive with my imagination, and I got to also have a relationship with the natural world at a very, very young age. Part of my story includes that my parents separated when I was very young, and my mom moved to New York City and my dad stayed in Vermont. And then I started moving between them almost every year. And I got to be the new kid in town. I don't know if any of you guys have been the new kid in school, but I'm just going to tell you right now, it pretty much sucks. And I did it a lot. And to really cope with the pain and the awkwardness, I really began to bring this sanctuary with me everywhere I went. And that sanctuary went by the name of books. And I could escape into these stories, and I could escape into these other worlds. And even though I was in the cafeteria all alone, I was actually in a lot of connection and companionship and community. It was just something that no one else could see. And it was one of the ways that really expanded my life and expanded my world. And when I was 16, I learned the power of the responsibility of storytelling, because a very tragic incident happened in my life, and my best friend in high school committed suicide. And so I went to that sanctuary, that place that I knew as being my safe place in the world. And I started writing my own stories. And I ended up writing a play really as a way to process the grief. I was trying to make sense of something that I couldn't make sense of, and no one was helping me make sense of it. And so I went to that place, and that I ended up writing a play, and that play ended up winning a spot in a playwriting festival, and it was put on a stage, and I got to see it, and I was actually in it. And I got to really learn the responsibility, because as I put my questions, my grief, all that into the world, I learned that what you put out comes back. And so as I put that out, then a lot of audience members would come back and they would share their grief with me and their upset. And so I was like, oh, there's a responsibility here about how we use our language. I began to learn the business of storytelling in the realm of theater. I was very lucky. My parents spotted the talent that I had. And when I was going off to college to study acting, they said, don't waste your time and our money. If all you want to do is study acting, go get an acting school. Don't waste your time in college. Let's talk about that later. So I did. I went off to New York City, and I studied with Sanford Meisner at Neighborhood Playhouse. And I really got to understand what the business of that world was like. I worked off Broadway, I worked in summer stock, and I realized that not only did I not want to spend my life speaking other people's words, but I was not cut out for that business. So I went off to college, and I ended up in the realm of being a wilderness guide. And really, I was collaborating with bringing, environmental education through performance. I was learning wilderness leadership skills. And I began to discover the probably original human healing power of stories, of what it is to be in relationship with story and the elements. Because there we were sitting around a fire, talking story. And I got to see the power that happens in a space when you have time to speak and when you have time to listen. And in those cultures and in those communities, when you're sitting around a fire and someone opens their mouth to speak, there's this real assumption that they have something to say. People listen without interrupting. And I really learned that way of being there. All along the way, as I was in that world of theater, as I was in that world of story, even though I didn't want to work in it professionally, I saw that there was something very powerful happening in the rooms. Like I could feel this energy. We were like, yes, making illusion and magic, but there was something happening. And I could see that as soon as we opened the door, it's like all that energy that we had created just like walked out the door of the theater. And I wanted to know, like, how could we do something? How could we harness that energy? I was very curious. And I kept walking with that question. That question eventually, I eventually took that question and I took that question to San Francisco. And I was walking with that big question of what were the stories that we need to tell at our time that will bring healing and restoration to the earth? And I found myself right in the center of that greatest, biggest question around climate change. And I ended up working with Al Gore at his television network, and I produced and hosted the Green Channel. And I was asking these questions. What is the information that will give people the inspiration that will move them to motivation, that will get them to activation? And I got to see all the data. And what I learned was that people don't respond to data. They're responding to stories. And I had the data that showed me. And it was like this golden ticket that gave me the key out of working in the mainstream media and back into this place that was really where the seat of my soul thrives, which is in this realm of storytelling. And along this way, I was, at that age where we're making our way and finding our path and trying to figure out where do we give our gifts and get paid for it. And I went to the edge of the ocean with that big prayer. I was like, how do I give my gift and pay my rent and have fun doing it? And I thought I was going to come up with this really clever business idea because I was really aligned with that sustainability movement and what I received, and it's a much longer story that I won't tell now, but in that prayer and in that time of deep listening, I received a very big story. And I committed myself to learning how to tell that story. And it's been about over a decade. And it was in the study of that story that my world began to expand and expand and expand into really understanding story as a mystery school. Story is a place that teaches us everything that we need to know about how to commune with the unseen world. Story that gives us access to the most oldest ancient technologies that humans have around growing wise, which is around initiations, and how stories play a key role in our process of crossing through thresholds and initiatory experiences. And I began to expand, and I studied with Stephen Jenkinson and Martin Shaw I'm forgetting all their names, Michael Mead. I started really putting into studying with them, and I did priestess training, and I started finding this other thing, that big question that I started asking, how do we harness this energy in this magical field that we're creating? And I began to come back into the space of the story ceremony. I started leading story ceremonies where we would work very intentionally with that energy. We would work with telling the story, but then actually consciously using the alchemy of the energy that we were co-creating together to create healing opportunities for everyone in that room and to allow the story to come into that space as a healer. So that's a little bit about what brought me here to you today. And in doing that and teaching that, I began to bring it online. And now we've got a School for Sacred Storytelling that's been in play for about 5 years. We have 40 guest teachers, and I get to play at the helm of it. And let's get into it. Let's go into some of the oldest teachings of what words. They're so fun. They're so fun. So the Hawaiians believe that words are so powerful that they can raise enough energy to slow the world or to set it into motion. If you've ever gotten to hear the hula, if you've ever gotten to hear those Hawaiian chants, I really, really recommend go listen, feel that vibration of a culture that knows that their words can slow the world or set it into motion. Talk about relationship to power, collaboration. Sicilians believe that words poke holes in the universe. And I always think about that when my temperature gets a little hot, and I realize that anything I can say, you can't ever take it back. You can't ever take anything back that you say. So that's not to put a lock and key on your mouth, but that's to know that anything that you say, we're poking holes in the universe. Australians say that the stories of the past need to be sung to the present so that the future can exist. The Maori say that the words don't describe a thing, they are the thing. And in Japan, they have a word called kotodama. And kotodama means it means word spirit. It speaks about the original divine spirit of a word before it even enters the world of thought waves. Isn't that great? That words are their own beings or their own spiritual essence. Abracadabra, I speak, I create as I speak. It's one of the oldest words on our planet. And all the ancient religions agree that the world was sung, spoken, and chanted into existence. That one line always gives me a little bit of hope when things get a little bit wonky, and that story of, should humans really be here? It's like, are we just bad? It's like there's a lot of really intense stories about our presence on this planet right now. But when we come back to this piece, it speaks to one of our unique roles on this planet, that we, with our language, with our spirit, with our intention, are the shapers of matter on this planet. Not the only ones, because God only knows what the birds are singing into being, and what the whales are singing into being, and what the cats are purring into being. It's like we're collaborators, there's a lot of us that are doing it, but we are definitely obvious ones that are shaping matter with our language. So let's get into the big question. And this is a collaborative inquiry that I'm going to ask you, which is, what is a story? What is it? What is a story? And this is a question that you guys can type in the chat box. You can say it out loud. It's whichever one you would like.
I think oftentimes it's a recollection, like a gathering of memories.
It's a gathering of memories, right? So, and it's a beautiful expression. It's a gathering of memories. And stories, they will often, they're out there doing something. They're sharing it for a reason. So they're going to take you on a journey. And so if they're bringing you back to somewhere, they probably want to show you something, or tell you something, or warn you or something, or teach you of something. But there's some intention to why we're going on this gathering of memories. And I always think it's an evolution of consciousness, right? It's kind of an amazing thing where when we remember our memories together, when we share them, now I get to learn from your experience. I get to I don't have to make all the same mistakes that you made. I get to learn from your mistakes and then make my own mistakes on top of them. But why would I have to repeat the same ones over and over again? And so memories, like memory sharing, those kinds of storytelling is really helpful. I think of that often when I was looking at all of the posts that were coming up during the Me Too movement, and how many of those stories were the same. And I thought, oh gosh, if we had had more women who could tell their stories and not feel ashamed of what was happening to them, we would have known that how many people were not alone in their experience. And I can't help but think of this next generation, they probably won't be going through the same exact repeat. There's going to be something else. We're evolving together, and we get to do that as we share what our lives. Story is a way to connect to humanity and be in our collective consciousness, says Karen. I love that. Right. So we're connecting to each other. We have this amazing, all of these things go off. Our serotonin goes off, dopamine goes off, but we get a lot of pleasure hits when we're in the space of storytelling. And I think, Leanne, were you saying that you were writing stories to children, but it's really fun to tell stories. And as soon as you start telling a story to a group, especially, kids, but also adults, you'll start seeing them melt. Something in our animal body just kind of goes back to this, I get to just receive a story. Adriana is saying, for me, it's about sharing wisdom to pass on with more dimension. Right, and a wisdom story is a real thing because it's not just a repetition of what happened, right? Because it's like, well, I fell in a ditch. Okay, that's information. A wisdom story is, there I was living my life and I was not paying any attention. My head was in the clouds, and all of a sudden I fell in a ditch and I broke my leg. And while I was there, I had to learn all about how to be still. And I'd never been still before. I'd never had to be that present before. And all of a sudden, now that I'm in the space of presence, I'm understanding that from now on, I really want to walk with 2 feet on the earth and my body fully engaged with the place that I am, not focusing on another planet. So, here we have a little bit of like look, I'm not the same person that I was when that happened. I've taken you on a journey and I've learned a couple of things and I've taught them to you so that hopefully, as you walk through the world, you can be in that place of presence. The same for me, stories that touch the soul are mighty companions. Oh, that's so good. Yes, mighty companions. I once had a woman tell me that I'm going to give you a story as if it could walk with me and stay with me. I mean, how beautiful is that? Elizabeth is saying it's a search and a suggestion. Search and suggestion. Here's where I'm going to go with that. I know that in the times of life when I am most confused or something has just got me by the pants and I just can't make sense of something, I'll often go to a story to make sense of it. And it's not like a literal story. It's often a fictional story. I thought I was the only one that was doing that. And then I heard Starhawk, who came on as one of our guest teachers. She said that she does that too, that whenever she's walking with a really big question, she'll put it into a fictional story and she'll allow the story to reveal itself to her and she'll find the answer in that way. And it is this kind of amazing doorway to the divine, to the unseen world, where all these different aspects, and maybe you call them the muse, or maybe you call them the guides or angels or the ancestors or the earth speaking out loud. All of a sudden, these voices can have a voice, they can have the unseen world can have a voice through your story. It has a place where it can be heard. And this way, story to me is a very mystical aspect. Because while this body is pretty commonly understood, this body has a soul, right? There's a soul that lives inside of it. And inside the vehicle of story, spirit can exist. And so we can be in communion with spirit through a story. And there's a lot of different ways you can be in communion with spirit, but that's one of them. And then Virginia is saying stories given from spirit for healing, right? And so what a beautiful thing, stories given from spirit for healing. And again, you're talking about a story that comes with an intention, it's doing something. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Another way of looking at a story, very unpoetic, we're looking at it through the mechanism of the latest technology, and that's often how humans refer to themselves. And so in that way, I'm going to call a story as an operating system. And it's where we can, it's where we learn our values, our belief systems, how to live on this planet, what we believe is possible, what our roles should be, what we should expect from life. So think about it. It's all in the programming. Look, I can't make this stuff up. It's a television, what were the TV shows that you were watching when you were growing up? What did they teach you to expect about love, about romance, about jobs, about work, about what you were supposed to do in life, what you were supposed to work for, all these different things. What were the kinds of stories that were being told about your table, at the table of at the family, about money and resource and who has access to it and who doesn't? What were all the things that were coming into you in the form of these stories, consciously or unconsciously, intentionally or unintentionally? Now, another way of looking at a story is I was once walking through the canyon. I live in Topanga Canyon in California, and I was walking in the trees. I swear to God, the trees were like, "Leah, that's a horrible explanation for a story." And I was like, "Well, You got something better? And they're like, yeah, of course. A story, it's a library of the soul. And I was like, oh yeah, that's better. So I have to credit the land that I walk on for a far more poetic and beautiful expression. And that is also what we were speaking about a little bit earlier, where they hold our memories, but it's like they are holding the consciousness, the evolutionary consciousness of humans. And so when you go back to really study stories to understand it, you understand the place that it was born from, the people who told it, what they were in service to, what they could and could not say. And in these stories, it's like we get to have this beautiful expression of how humans have continued to evolve and change and shift through time, and it's all kept through our stories. So then there's this other thing, and it's called a sacred story. So what distinguishes a sacred story? Again, there's no wrong answer, only right answers. What is it? What comes to mind? What is a sacred story?
I guess what pops into my mind would be a story that not only we hold, but holds us as well.
Hmm. Well, it feels so good in my body when you say that. Right. So it's like, right, there's the experience of that we hold a story and that we're carrying it through, but that in the holding, it's like it's like a hug, like when you hug somebody. Do you ever say like one person is hugging the other over the other? No, it's like it's a communal gesture. And so I see that, Maureen, and how you just explained that, right? That like as we hold a story, the story holds us. How beautiful. And it really, it's like, what story are you allowing to live through you? What's the stories that is, yeah, I'm not going to go any more on that, but that's beautiful. Oh, you guys are so poetic. Listen to this. Leanne is saying, a sacred story touches eternity and that which connects us all. So, right, how beautiful. And now we're looking at this universal aspect, that John Steinbeck says, your story must be about the reader or it will not exist. And so it's like once there's a moment when, so I, fell down the hole in this ditch the other day. That happened to me. But now when I start coming to you as a sacred storyteller, I'm telling you the story of us. Look, we've all fallen in a hole at some point or another. And I learned how to get out of it, and like we've all know how to get out of it. And so in this expression of talking about story, I'm actually talking about the universal experience that lived through me. And it's this kind of giveaway experience. It's a very unnarcissistic experience. When you come as a story to give it away, it's no longer about you. It's about us. And so there's an aspect of generative, energetic relating that happens. You are in the space of giving. And that to me is one of those things that distinguishes a true sacred storyteller. That they understand that they are a guide between the worlds, that they're a guide to the center of the soul, that they're a guide into the inner temple of consciousness. And it's very different when you see someone on the stage. Like when I've heard a sacred story, I feel like alive and inspired and really good about myself. And I'm going to quit caffeine and sugar tomorrow, and I'm going to go exercise more too. It's like, I just feel alive with life, and I've received something. When I'm watching someone who's not in that position, and I really think it's really important to be discerning because our energy can be used in so many different ways. And there's something else when they're talking story on a stage and it's truly just about them and they're sucking the energy out of this room. And sometimes they'll be like, oh, they're so much better than I am. You'll start getting these thoughts. Your head will start to quicken. You'll start looking up, and it's like, and you're not getting necessarily fed. You're actually almost getting fed upon. It's a very subtle thing that can happen, and it can be very alluring. But I really want to invite you to start really attuning to the kinds of energetic fields that you are participating in this exchange, because this is one of the most powerful exchanges that humans have, and we don't need any technology to do it. We are the vessel that's doing it in terms of generating energy, giving energy, receiving energy. And so storytelling at its best, it is a generative act of giving and receiving. And every story is born out of the listeners. I know that's kind of crazy, but it's absolutely true. Absolutely true. That the story comes from the story that speaks to us. It's actually speaking to the listeners. So your number one job as a storyteller, and this is a thing that so many people miss, your number one job as a storyteller is to make sure that your co-creators, those listeners, those people that are called an audience, they're really the garden that the seed of consciousness will be placed in. And like any great gardener, you want to tend to that garden very, very well. You want to make sure that that garden has got good compost and it's really fecundity and it's ready to receive. And so one of those ways that you can work with your community and in terms of your telling is making sure that they understand that they're in a very special place, that they're in like a Toto, we're not in Kansas anymore. So one of the ways that you can prepare the people to catch your story is to kind of give them a bit of a moment where they really, that this isn't like normal life, that they need their presence and their attention. Some of that comes through your own sense of self and your own confidence and knowing that you have a gift to give and it's worthy and valuable. Some of it comes, the old storytellers will also do some summoning of the spirit and they'll start drumming, and that breaks all the energy in the space and creates a space for the story to be caught. Some of us will sing. Again, what are we doing? But we're working with the energy of the space. We're creating a space for the story to live within. When I was asked to give a talk at Google, I walked in with 24 roses, 24 red roses, and I handed a rose to everyone in the audience. Because I knew that I had to create a Toto, we're not in Kansas anymore moment to get their full attention. I wanted to bring them in relationship to their senses. And so I asked them to smell the rose before I started talking about story. So oftentimes your stories will inspire you when you ask them, you're like, what do we need to come into communion with the people that will call you out? And often allow yourself to be inspired by that, just that mere question. Another time that I told a story, it was right after a big presidential election, and a lot of people were really upset and all turned around and upset. And we came together to talk story, and I didn't have any flowers because other times I'll drop rose petals on people, anything to bring more beauty, the presence of beauty. The muse loves beauty. So I'll do everything I can to lure the muse in and court the muse for these events. But we didn't have any flowers. And the story said, give them grapes. Like, grapes, that's so weird. Why would I give them grapes? But I trust the stories when they speak, especially if they're ideas that I don't understand. That means I get to go along for the ride, and the great reveal gets to happen as much for me as anyone else. So we got some grapes and we run around the circle and we handed out grapes to everybody and we all ate them together. And then I saw the genius in the story. It wanted us to taste the sweetness of life, even when there was fear in the room. I couldn't have made that up myself. So when we come into relationship with these sacred stories, what are we talking about when sacred? We're saying that there's a divine life force that lives inside that story. That's what we're saying when we say the sacred. I honor and see the life inside of you. And so a sacred story is coming in service to others. It's coming in service to life itself. And so to be in relationship with a sacred story means that you become an ally of story. It's a humble role. And it means that you don't have to have all the answers. It's also really easy. You kind of get off the hook. Nobody gets just how delightful it is, because when you're a sacred storyteller, you don't have to have all the answers. You just get to open your channel with your really strong intention, really knowing what you are in service to. That's a question I'm going to leave you with right now. What are you in service to? What will you give your precious life to through the expression of language? Is it love, communion, healing? You know, these are, when you know this, it gets amplified to the stories that you tell, because you can't help. It's not like you have to tell, oh, I'm going to tell you a love story because I'm all about love. No, no, no. You just tell the story in your loving way and people will walk away feeling loved. You know, it just happens. Right, Jeffrey's saying a sacred story is one that puts you in touch with your best self, a self you might not even be aware exists within yourself. Yes, so true. And Elizabeth is saying a confirmation of what we are in this together. Beautiful. So it's, yes, Adriana is saying, sacredness to me offers a sense of ancestral and rooted in unity. So beautiful. Ginny's saying story to and from the heart, right? We get activated in our heart. We're not just in our heads. There's something else that's happening. And it's like a full mind, body, soul experience that we all get to be in this wild communion. Look, I'm going to take you on a journey. Once upon a time, not so long ago, not so far away, at the bottom of the ocean was a really big whale. Now this whale, he was a singer. And he was down there practicing his instrument. He played one part of his throat and it sounded like a horn. He sounded another part of his throat, it sounded like a bass. He was just going for it. And the more he played, he thought he was just practicing by himself. Other beings started to come around. The clownfish came around. Hammerhead sharks started to gather. The mermaids couldn't keep themselves away. And before he knew it, he was surrounded, absolutely surrounded by all loving creatures of the ocean. And then right on his back, the very center of his back, was this young girl with long wavy hair who started to join his song. And when she sang, gold dust flew from her mouth. Okay. How many of you saw that image that was being created? Okay. And when you saw the image, did you feel a little nervous being underwater that long? We held our breath for a long time. No, because we reality bended. We traveled together to a different place. We traveled to something that we don't even know is real. We traveled to see this young being who had this expression. I did a couple of things very consciously. I didn't tell you what color she was. I didn't tell you what color her hair was. But did you get the sense that she was beautiful? Did you get the sense that she was someone you wanted to hang out with? There are some things that there's different kinds and styles of storytelling. I'm getting some nods, So it's like there's some ways of storytelling where they say, fill in the coloring book, tell everybody exactly what it looks like, And then there are other realms of story where you give people the essence and you let their own imaginations take shape and form, especially when we're talking about beauty. I think that's very important, that we allow people to see their own idea of beauty rather than press it onto them. Anyway, so there's something else that we did just now with this wild high technology adventure that we did without VR, which is that the right lobe of my brain started getting very, very active as I created those images or wherever those images came from. It was like dee, 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 dee. And the right lobe of your brain also got very active as you created those images inside of your mind. So talking about who is powerful in this world, right? You think it's the storyteller who really powerful, planting ideas and images in other people's brains just by speaking them out loud. But it's not just the storyteller, it's the listener, because you're the one that allows them in. And you're the one that determines with discernment who gets to live in your mind and who doesn't. Okay, so a couple of other things. I'm going to take you on a journey of And what is a story? What are they doing here? And I'm going to share my thing. Dun, 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 do, 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 do. And so what does story do in its best and greatest form is that we talked about this. It creates a sense of connection. It connects us through our hearts. There's the neurology of connection, what's happening, and all that time that I was thinking, oh my God, it's so magical what's happening in these rooms, what I'm calling magic, Stanford's calling neural coupling. And that's what's happening when our different minds are actually connecting in the same place at the same time. It's a very understood connection that we have between each other. It's also, to me, it's about being on the path of eldership. That when I step onto the path as a sacred storyteller, I'm saying, yes, I'm stepping onto this path of the giveaway, of tending to those who come before, who come after me. I know that my life is of value, that there is something to give, and that perhaps the only thing that I could truly leave behind is a story. Because everything else is going to fall apart. The house is going to go away. The car is going to go away. Even the statues will eventually get worn down by life, But stories are mysterious. We have a story on our planet right now that's over 4,000 years old. It's still living. It's defied all the laws of entropy. So it's really quite a thing of what would it be to leave a story behind that would live far beyond you. It gives a sense of belonging. And this is a really powerful piece because, so oftentimes people think that they're the only one having that experience. But when we share our stories and we're like, oh, I'm not alone, you've had this too. Or when someone else shares their story and you're like, oh, wow, they're further down the path. They know how to live with this, or they've had this experience, right? It gives us a sense of connection and communion. Our stories can be healing. And I want to really say that it can be healing if we meet them as such, so that means that if something tragic happens or hard happens, or where we experience suffering, or we're initiated by life, then we don't want to say the thing that's happened in the same way every single time. We need to allow our stories to change as we change. I think about this like a tree, we want our trees to be able to grow strong. So eventually, they have nice thick roots and they grow and they give us fruit and things like that. Same thing with our stories. Our stories should be allowed to continue to always change and take different forms and get bigger and bigger. And they form bridges. There's this thing that there's this research, particularly around people of different sexual identity. And they did this research where they used their test group who were very strong and clear about their lack of tolerance of people who had different sexual identities. And then they showed them some TV shows where the stories were told from the perspective of people of a variety of different sexual identities. And it was hearing the stories told from their perspectives rather than told about them that all of a sudden perspectives began to shift. And so when we tell stories, we can make bridges between different worlds. And I really believe at the heart of it all that story is an act of love. To tell a story is an act of love. It takes a lot to be able to tell a story. You gotta be able to face your fears and do all kinds of stuff. And in order to do that, it's just really an act of love. And every time I ever tell a story, I always fall in love. I always fall in love. And every time I hear a story, I always fall in love. There is an act of communion that's happening. This is the journey of the sacred storyteller. And to me, this looks like, it begins with courting the muse, courting the unseen world, making sure that there's space in your world for them, space in your home, meaning that there's got to be an altar, a desk where you can create or write, a book where you write down your ideas, space in your head. You can't be constantly blah, 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 blah about the world or about your roommate or about your family or about that. You've got to be able to have space so that the muse can come and be with you. And so that path to psychic silence, that's about being able to quiet the mind, or that thing that is really bothering you, taking it straight to the muse and working with that creative life force to be able to move it through. We have a whole class called Sanctuary, where we work with how do you create psychic silence and how to work with all these different energies to creative process. At some point on the journey, you're going to run into some good barriers, and that's great. I love this part. And to me, this means that you've really said yes to life because you're being initiated by life. And to me, that's what a block or a barrier is. It's a sign that says, okay, in order to proceed, you now must access your deepest strength. You must release that old jacket that doesn't work anymore. You got to upgrade and wear your new fancy clothes on the other side. And you're going to have to, by the way, access your core power. You're going to have to find a new way of using your voice. Something is going to have to happen before you can cross over. And so blocks and barriers are very, very powerful initiatory experiences. And so being able to name them and claim them and work with them will bring you over to the other side. You got to look behind you. You have to understand the stories that made you, either from your own family, from your own culture, from your community, from your country. In order to fully understand yourself and who you are as a storyteller, you have to know where you came from. And then you have to look within the stories that created you. You know, again, this is like, what are the stories that you're running in your system, you know, about yourself, about your world, about your role in the world. Then you get to come to this place of explore your storyteller archetype. And we're going to go into that in the next slide. And then there's a moment where you get to really stand in the power and the potency of your gift. You know what you're in service to. You know what the stories are, why you're giving them. And then you come to that place and where you really, then it's time to really start working with your skill and your craft. There's some point once you're going to return into the mythos, and the mythos is like these original origin stories. And we're going to come to that place, which is, what is your mythos? What is your origin story? Where we're starting to mix the human existence with the soul existence to know the wholeness of yourself. Another aspect is listening for what's needed. This is such a crucial part as a storyteller, to really understand what's happening in the world and to understand what stories are needed right now that will bring salve, that will bring healing and medicine to this time. One of the most powerful things that you can do in terms of being a storyteller is knowing how to change a story. Now, this could be working with a story where a very traumatic event happened and being able to heal it and bring healing to it, or it could be an old story that is still lingering around our world, but it's holding an old consciousness. And so how do you meet it with respect? How do you respect the bones of this old story while bringing it into these times? Again, I really firmly believe that no story is ever designed or supposed to stay the exact same all the time. And these myths, you know, I'm a lover of the myths. And was a myth, but a story that has never been tamed. It's never been enslaved by the word and written down and forced to stay the same forever. Myths were stories that were, they say that were the earth speaking out loud. A true myth, you never know who created it. It's just among us. So each person gets to carry it differently, and it changes according to who's carrying it and who that person is speaking to. It's a really potent, beautiful expression of life. And then all of it is coming into this journey of really, truly giving your gift. Now, when we look at this kind of different storytelling archetypes, we're all different people in the realm of storytelling. We all have different purposes, and we all have different aspects of what we're in service to. And it's this kind of whole big wheel. And so when we look at that, you know, you might be that person that's carrying those old stories of Cantadora, or you might be a midwife. You might be someone who's catching the new stories of our time. You might be someone who really stands in the realm of mentor with your storytelling. And when someone comes to you and they say, I don't know, should I break up with a girlfriend or the boyfriend? What do you do? What should I do? A storytelling mentor will tell them a story so that they can find their own answer. There's the alchemist who is really like working with different kinds of stories and mixing potions and recipes and bringing different kinds of stories to life. There's the healer. That's someone who is really here to either bring healing to themselves or healing to others through the stories that they're telling. You know, there's the wisdom keeper. I like the mentor. There's the visionary. And this is a really amazing story archetype. And it's one that's very near and dear to my heart and one we're going to be playing with a lot right now. And that is all about what is it to be able to see into the future and bring a glimpse of that back to this time and create a path over there. And so being a visionary, it's not about like being able to like be a prophecy, but a visionary storyteller, it's about really having access to your dreaming skills, your deep listening, your inspiration, and yes, your capacity to go into the future and to catch a glimpse and to share something that could be possible there. This is very different than spell casting, which we're seeing right now. And a lot of what we're seeing is a lot of people are casting spells upon the future. They're determining, they're saying, this is what's going to happen, you know. Well, it hasn't happened yet. And we're the only ones that are determining the future with every step that we take today. So it's a very, very powerful, potent role to be able to do that. The archaeologist is digging up the old ones, the old stories, and bringing them back into life. And then we've got the dreamer weaver who is capturing them out of the space. Oh gosh, I lost my little spot in here. I'll just give you the last drama. And this I love is that when you put them all together, the journey and the archetypes, you end up with a web. I love that the web is one of the archetypes of the storyteller, that we're weaving the world into being through the words that we speak. So that is our